Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Road Not Taken. I'm Matt Anderson, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Her name is Trisha Daho. And just a little bit about Trisha. She's from a small town in Ohio, in the Midwest in the US. She made partner in 9 years at a Big Four accounting firm after getting a law and business degree, or 2 different degrees in 2 different places. She worked with large, diverse teams, and their clients were dozens of Fortune 500 companies, specifically helping them with high growth and helping them sustain values of billions of dollars. I should have just read this bio. I'm sorry. I don't normally do this. I thought I could. I know Trisha somewhat, so I thought I'd get it right, but that's okay. What else? So she now runs her own company called Empowered, working with C-suite and managing partners, primarily with professional service firms, helping them mostly with develop, accelerate, and sustainable growth, helping them plan strategically. She's extremely good at it. I can vouch for the many testimonials I've heard on her behalf. She also does work, in addition, with larger firms to create success for women and diverse people who are entering leadership positions through diversity and inclusion peer advisory experiences, which focus on strategy, which I know Trish is extremely strong in, high-performing teams, advocacy, and leadership. She regularly writes and speaks on the following topics: authenticity in leadership, high impact teams, creating growth cultures, diversity and inclusion, and others. She's married to a Frenchman named Bashir, loves to travel. She met him on holiday in Paris. She loves to travel, not surprisingly, and also in her spare time fosters Labrador retrievers and loves watching foreign films. Trisha, welcome to The Road Not Taken.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's great to be able to have this conversation. So my one pre-prepared kickoff question is, it sounds like you sort of hit a defining day when you'd had enough with the path you were on and you wanted to take a different path. Can you tell us about that particular moment, even though I'm sure it was a cumulative thing at the end of the day, but talk about what happened?
Yeah, so I was still with a Big Four accounting firm. I was a partner for probably about 5.5 years at that point. I had been traveling around the country for work, but had not been overseas for work. I really just went overseas for pleasure. Mm-hmm. Met my now husband probably 3 months before this defining moment. Went back to Paris to spend another couple of weeks with him. And we were sitting at a cafe across from Notre Dame, and I was doing a conference call. And he was extremely patient with me, but he looked at me after I was done with the conference call and said, "Is this really that important to you?" It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't admonishing. It was simply, does this mean enough for you to have it interfere with what you're doing in your personal life? And frankly, I hadn't had much of a personal life beforehand. So I thought to myself, no one's ever asked me that question before, but not really. It's not as important to me as I've made it out to be. I am actually more than just what I do for a living. And it set me on a road really quickly to decide, while I'm still young enough, I'm going to jump out and start my own company.
That's really funny. What's interesting about this is one thing I'm noticing in quite a lot of the conversations I'm having with people I'm interviewing is the number of people where somebody, typically a friend, but it's not really the label that matters, but somebody that was reasonably close to them in their lives intervened and stepped up and almost called them out on it like a referee. And I just think that's absolutely fascinating because, partly because we all have different definitions of what a friend is, but just the value that other person can be. And it doesn't even have to, and sometimes it's not even someone that we're always that close to, I'm contradicting myself, but just somebody that calls us out and it's almost like it pushes us off this track that we're on and gets us to stop and think. And so we owe a lot of gratitude to people like that. And it's made me more conscious personally that I should play that role with other people a bit more instead of, I don't know, I think I've typically sort of figured, well, it's up to them to make decisions, not me to sort of butt in. But I think what I'm realizing is that sometimes we do need those people from time to time. So anyway, it's just funny that it sounds like the same thing kind of happened to you, that if you hadn't had that, well, here's a question. If you hadn't had that pattern interrupt from your future husband, do you think you'd have had the that realization at some point later down the road, or is that impossible to say?
I think at some point I would have come to that realization, but it would have been too late to really do anything about it.
Oh, wow.
I would have been probably pushing 50. And at that point, you're only like 5 to 7 years away from just retiring. And I guess, yeah, maybe you could have a career at that point. But for me to make a giant leap into what I, at the time, felt like an abyss from a very, I guess, successful corporate career took a lot for me, because I never thought I was going to do that. I thought I am going to be here until the very end. I'm going to be wildly successful. I'm going to enjoy this. But, you know, to your point, most of our friends, at least most of my friends and family, just said, well, she must love it because she's doing it 75 hours a week. She must want to be there. And no one ever called me out on it before, but he came from such a different perspective on what enjoying life really means and doing meaningful work and all that stuff, that it just kind of, it was just kind of a, not a slap in the face, but very similar to a slap in the face.
Do you recall a train of thought that you had when he said it? In other words, did you initially have this objection like, well, you don't know what you're talking about? Or
No, I didn't have that at all.
So what was the train of thought, as you recall?
I think the train of thought was, wow, I really haven't been happy with this for a good solid 2 years now. I'm not really getting to do what I really want to do. I'm missing about 80% of my potential and I'm getting bored. Maybe I should do something about this.
Wow.
It was almost like he gave me permission to actually feel what I was really feeling.
Did he have any idea that that would happen? Or was he just genuinely curious?
No. He still has he doesn't comprehend the impact he had, even now.
And so how soon was it then before you actually said that you left corporate and went independent?
It was about 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. So you had to prepare the way a little bit.
Yeah. And actually, I grew up very risk averse. So my toe in the water was to go into a much smaller regional accounting firm and help them with their strategic development. But I was still an employee. I didn't intend to be there very long, but that's what I did first. So that was and frankly, I learned enough there to do what I'm doing now. So it was definitely worth the 18 months I spent there. But I kind of like, it would be wrong to say that I made a giant splash right when I jumped out of corporate. I kind of said, okay, let's go. And then I kind of built up the energy and the gravitas to be able to do it all the way.
Yeah. And I think that's great for people listening too, that are, contemplating change, is that, it doesn't, I know there's that great metaphor about, well, you have to be this bird jumping off a cliff and you'll learn to fly on the way down. But, not all of us are going to be wired that way. And we need to have the side hustle first, or we need to, do something on a smaller scale or experiment. Or sometimes I know people go self-employed and their first client is their former employer, hiring them to do some work. So that, in a way, I don't know, it's probably reassuring to people to hear that. You said you grew up very risk averse. Do you think that's something that you learn from your parents?
Yes, absolutely. So I grew up in a little tiny town in Ohio that was actually almost all Italian except for us. And they were, it was a very close, tight-knit community, but we were on the outside a lot. We moved around quite a bit before I was 8 years old, given what my dad did for a living. But my dad grew up very poor in West Virginia. And, it was extremely important for me to be completely well-educated and get a great job and make my employer happy. And that's the way we were raised. So the mindset thing is huge, because I don't know if I was a natural born people pleaser, or if that's the way I was sort of socially ingrained, but I was a total people pleaser. That served my corporate career really, really well. But jumping out and deciding I'm going to start my own firm and I'm going to create, value out of nothing and all that stuff, it took a massive mindset change to not have a feedback loop anymore, and to say I have value even if I'm not working for someone else. So, and I can make lots of money, for example, without getting paid by an employer and having a steady paycheck and all those things. It took me 2 good years to get to a point where I was like, everything is going to be okay. And we're going to create a lot of value in this. And I don't need someone telling me you're a 5-rated partner anymore.
So wait, so the value, knowing you had value, talk about that. So you're saying that was a confidence building process after you left corporate, or you must have had it must have been a huge confidence builder over years to make partner as quickly as you did. Right?
Yes, but it was all based on what other people assessed my value was.
Mm-hmm.
My worth was based on what I did for everybody else. And I'm not saying that's not the case now so much, but it's much more multifaceted than that now. I was measured constantly on how much revenue I brought in and how happy my teams were and how productive my teams were and what our realization percentages were. That is easily measured. When you go out with a completely new message and you don't know if anyone's going to fully understand it right away. And I never doubted I could do what I said I could do. Mm-hmm. I doubted, though, that people would understand the value of me just by me showing up and telling them. Mm-hmm. So it took a shift to be able to get to that point.
Well, what do you mean? So, I mean, on surface, what you said makes complete sense. Like the shift happened in your head. But I'm also thinking that if you went into some companies and showed them results, then, well, that gave you the confidence to know you could do it. And presumably you got some good word of mouth, or, you had testimonials from that as well. So was it a combination of both? Just sort of applying it in a different environment?
But in the beginning, I didn't have any results on my own. Right. I only had this gigantic brand behind that said, she must be good because she works there. Mm-hmm. And now I have my own brand who no one knows from Adam. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, look, I come from a place where you have to be excellent at what you do and you have to have results or you wouldn't last. But at some point, they have to take a leap of faith that I'm telling the truth until I can show them that there are results. And what I do now is such an intangible. I had to get in the right frame of mind to be able to communicate that well. Because at EY, at the global accounting firm, you could say, we saved this firm $200 million. We'll charge you $2 million to do the work. Do you want to do that? I mean, that's a pretty easy conversation. Saying I'm going to go into a firm and work with your people and help you change your culture and your technology and your processes and your business growth opportunities and the way you brand yourselves. That's a whole other ball of wax and very esoteric. So it took a long time it took 2 good years for me to be able to communicate that well and have enough results behind me as my own brand that I felt like I was believable.
What skill sets have you needed to learn going independent? I mean, because obviously you had knowledge and skills built up very effectively working for a large corporate and the results to show, but what have you had to learn independently? Yeah,
I would say the first big one was to say no a lot more often. So really? in the first 18 months, I probably met with anybody who would meet with me.
Sure.
And I had way too much caffeine. And I was basically giving a lot of free advice. I wasn't very strategic, which is kind of ironic, in who I was going to meet with and what the purpose of those meetings were.
Sure.
So starting to say no and get more strategic about where I was. The other thing would be, the interaction, because this is a pretty intimate relationship I have to have with my clients. The interaction of them being comfortable enough with me to tell them what their challenges and even failures are so that I can help them be more successful and get what they want. That took me a while because I was not dealing with someone, in my Big Four accounting days, I was not dealing with someone who had actual skin in the game. I mean, I'm dealing with firms now where if it goes down, everybody goes down with it and the owners go down with it. And it's not the same thing. It's much more personal now.
So you're saying that when you did the corporate work, the people that, were paying your company were somewhat removed from the people you were actually working with. So it was a different dynamic. It was less threatening, but it was a safer environment to do the work, which it's probably not a bad place to learn, I suppose, because you can get good at it without feeling necessarily quite the stress that, as you said, that if you have a problem now, then everybody feels it very quickly. But what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that the need to be able to communicate with people candidly about things that they might not want to hear is something that you're saying you've had to learn that more now you're working for yourself.
Absolutely. So I did a lot of leadership development and was in charge of all kinds of diversity and inclusion initiatives at my big firm. But I could toe the firm line, right? They have their own firm line. Mm-hmm. So me coming in and saying, look, it could be way better than this. And why are you settling for this? Or why are you not being more intentional about this? Those are really difficult conversations that require a big trust level compared to where I was before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that takes a lot of courage. So for some reason, I don't feel settled enough on the Riskaverse piece because I don't know what it was I wanted as I need to ask. I suppose it's because I know quite a lot of people actually that have great jobs at corporate, and almost all of them have talked to me about wishing they could work independently. So what is it that, were you just unhappy enough that someone called you on it or raised it with you that you jumped, or I don't know, I guess any advice you'd have for people that are still feeling rather stuck in corporate, but really yearning to be independent?
A big part of it is that I tied a lot of my value to what I did for a living.
Yeah.
I liked the prestige of being in a giant firm and doing very prestigious work with big clients. Right. I liked that. I liked being able to say that.
Yeah.
I liked the comfort of that giant brand standing behind me every day and everywhere I went.
Yep.
And what I would say to people who want to take a leap is that contrary to what you've been told, either, explicitly or implicitly about what your value is, because almost everything we are told in our corporate environments is that our real value is what we bring to that firm. Mm-hmm. It's not what we even bring to our clients or to ourselves or whatever. You have value completely distinct and separate from your employer. Mm-hmm. And it can be turned into a million different things. Your role while you're on the planet is to figure out how to package and reframe your value and your talent into what you really want to do next. But the idea that we are only great because we have this great brand behind us or because we do this great big work is false, and it's what we tell ourselves over and over and over again.
So fascinating. This to me is a massive subject because so yesterday I was speaking to an audience and it was probably 90% men, and I decided to not people please and to make an observation that, and I said I'm about to make a stereotypical comment here, but I said too often I think men gauge their value based on how much money they make and the contribution they make into their families. So I'd love to hear your perspective on it, because you've just shared a fascinating perspective. That's I always was stuck to the phrase golden handcuffs. When people have these really well-paid jobs, they often can become incredibly miserable, but the money's so good and the lifestyle that their family's used to, they feel stuck. And you're saying that, part of the trap is that some people attribute or consider their value to be what they contribute to their company or that they do with their current line of work. And obviously the solution is to separate that and to sort of associate our value as just being innately caring people that are doing their best to live good lives, but it doesn't have to be associated to money or the company we work for. But can you give your perspective on that also? Forgive me, I guess I don't like stereotype, but also as a woman, because that you made the fascinating professional handcuff piece. Can you just elaborate on or elaborate on your journey as to how you shifted into seeing that your value was more than what you were contributing to the accounting firm?
Well, I guess a couple of things. You pushed a button because I think about how men are perceived in our culture all the time and how money is attached to value. Mm-hmm. And I think it frankly breaks my heart a little bit. Mm-hmm. I was extremely close to my father. My father was completely self-made and was also an enormously good man and a pillar of the community and a great father. I think we downplay and we just passed Father's Day. We downplay the importance of what a man does in his family that has nothing to do with actually providing for that family financially. So that's just, I'll get off my soapbox now. But
No, you can stay on it if you want. I mean, because this topic doesn't get much airtime, I don't think. And I think, honestly, it's so funny. This topic of value, intrinsic value, the more people raise obstacles about why they're not getting out of their own way, or they're unaware about it. I think this is one of the big ones, is that we have these labels for ourselves based on the values of the culture that we're living in, which are typically associated with wealth.
Materialism, yes. So, back to my corporate days, I didn't really buy into the idea that because I made a fantastically good living, that I should spend it all on a really high lifestyle. And I think that actually it was easier for me to ascribe myself to that philosophy because I was a woman, and all the expectations were not there for me to have 2 big cars and go on big vacations and have 2 homes and live in, a wealthy suburb. Those things were not there for me. And I didn't feel them in the same way that I think men do. So I got lucky in that respect. But what I would say is that you're going to be so much more extraordinary in every facet of your life, making even half, if you have to start with half of what you make now in a corporate environment and create, a lot more value and build wealth as you go, instead of having it kind of handed to you in that scenario. I mean, working 75 hours a week is not having it handed to you, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah. You're going to be so much more, I guess, fulfilled is the term, for lack of a better one. And you're going to be able to be more of everything you're supposed to be as a father and a husband and everything else in your community. And that's going to make you better at what you do for a living. The idea that we can put blinders on forever and work our 75 hours a week, and that someone else is living our lifestyle, is not really very satisfying. It doesn't bring out the best in what we're able to bring to the table either.
I mean, it's funny. 2 thoughts go through my head. One is one where I can't see it quite the same way, in the sense of, what was it you said? You said to me, you'll be more extraordinary in your life and create a lot more value. And then potentially, but I think part of this process has to be defining value, or one's own value, with how much money you make. I mean, I think that's part of the parcel, that it doesn't have to be this. In other words, that the shift doesn't have to guarantee that we get to that point, if we're going to spend most of our lives beating ourselves up because we're not as rich as our neighbor. Right.
Well, here's the thing. I never thought about it that way. So it wasn't like I said, I don't care, I'm miserable, I'm willing to make half what I make now. I was never there. I was like, yes, I have to start over in some sense now. And I'm already middle-aged, and what am I going to do, right? I have plans and dreams as well financially. But I said to myself, then I'll have to build a little mini empire, and it starts right now. So I knew I wasn't going to be making less than what I did in my Big Four firm forever. I was going to figure it out. I was going to put an infrastructure together. I was going to hire a team, and we were going to make it even better than what I had before. So I wasn't going to stay there forever. I wasn't just like surrendering and going home. I was, yes, I'm taking an intentional leap, and I'm building again. And we're going to have a much, frankly, I thought, I'm a partner in a big firm, and I have less authority, what I call juice, than if I jumped out and then came back as a third party to do something impactful with that firm. And that was not okay with me. So I decided to do something about it. But I was never in the space of, I'm afraid to leave this because I'm never going to get it back, meaning my financial situation. I thought, I'm going to come back with a vengeance, and I'm going to be even more successful at some point.
I love that mindset. So, and because we've talked about this, I don't want to be disingenuous to the audience. You're saying you don't recall where that drive comes from. You feel like you've always had that drive, that competitive, you've always been kind of an achiever type?
People have asked me that before. I really don't know where the drive comes from. When I went to school, I did well in school. When I went to corporate, I basically showed up and said, okay, how do you make partner? That's just the way I am. if I were a stay-at-home mom, I would be the one that's running the PTO, and
Yeah.
or that's what I do. That's just the way I'm wired, I think.
Yeah. Did someone model that to you though, or encourage you to be that person if they weren't that? I mean, was that something you got from your dad or your mother?
Yeah,
or?
probably from my father. My father owned his own business, started it from scratch right when we were getting into high school and almost college. So he had the stress of how he was going to get us through college without knowing what this business would be. Told me I could do absolutely anything, and that he was more fearless than I was. I was much more risk-averse, like I said, than he was. But literally no limits. We can do anything we want if we work hard. That's the thing, though. Work really hard to get what we want.
Oh, it sounds like a great dad. Okay, so then talk about, because I know you're doing diversity and inclusion work as well. How has that become? Well, can you explain? I'd love to know why that's so important to you. In other words, what did you experience such that, it's part of, because I think that's one of the things that really drives you is you want to make a difference in that area. And I'd love to hear what that journey is that's prompted you to fly that flag.
Yeah. So when I was growing up in my big global firm, I got a lot of opportunities really early in my career because I was willing to take on all those responsibilities and run with them. And that served me well for a lot of years. When I got closer to partner, I got a lot more purview into the things I wasn't getting invited to. And the fact that I didn't get feedback from a variety of different people. I became to be known as basically only as great as what I could produce for everybody else. Instead of, we know Trisha will make it happen. Let's kind of give her the advocacy and support to do that. I was only as good as my revenue from the prior 6 months. That kind of thing is how I ended up getting so successful, but it was hollow. I didn't have the gravitas behind me to propel me forward. And once you get to a certain level in a corporate firm like that, you need that or it becomes exhausting. And I remember moving to Chicago because I transferred from another office from Charlotte to Chicago back in 2010. And I sat next to a gentleman who was Pakistani and Muslim. And they had given him every difficult small beans client and said, make something out of this. And that was his trip to partner. But he was there 90 to 100 hours a week. Nobody ever talked to him. Nobody ever invited him to lunch. And I started to think about in my mind, what are we missing? How are we kind of running in a parallel universe with my white male counterpart partners? And it seems so much easier for them. They have more work-life balance. They're getting interesting things to do and interesting opportunities coming and falling in their laps. What am I missing? And I take some of it on myself. So the stuff that we do as a diversity firm is really honestly about inclusion more than diversity. Diversity is way more straightforward. We hire certain kinds of people. We see if they stay. We see if they get promoted. We can tell if we're doing a good job. The inclusion experience or lack of inclusion experience affects everything that happens from the time someone shows up until they get to the very top of where they want to go or they decide to leave. And it requires, have you heard the concept of unconscious bias?
Sure.
Okay, so it requires every single person, in order for it to work well, every single person in an organization to make unconscious bias conscious and then manage that conscious bias every single day with every thought, word, and action. And I'm ready for that. I'm ready to start to change the way things are, even knowing what that challenge is. So it's giving the same inclusive experience, and not just in all very positive, flowery ways, but in even the hard, more challenging ways. We don't tell women, for example, that you didn't do X, Y, or Z correctly because we don't want to make them uncomfortable, but they need to hear that. So it's a combination of what are we doing as a firm, and then what is that person doing to show up in a more inclusive way for themselves.
It's interesting. So I interviewed someone Oh, well, let's say it was a couple months ago now, and he's an innovation expert. And one of the interesting comments that he makes, either I can't remember if he made it in the interview or if he made it in the book, but he talked about that the most profitable companies now have very diverse boards, and that it's still a really neglected area. And so it's interesting that I'm assuming that's not common knowledge, because I would assume if it were, that more companies would say, well, it would even make better business sense to have a more diverse group of people on our board, because they're gonna bring together different kinds of ideas that can help us be more innovative and grow. Right. So it's interesting to hear what you're saying, that's still, in other words, it's still a great deal of many companies who are not doing that very well.
There are. And, the hard part is that it's not, 98% of the time, it's not malicious. It's not on purpose. Mm-hmm. It's just where the cards are falling where they may, because it's not intentional.
Yeah. So it's not entirely related at all, really. But I was listening to James Clear's book about habits yesterday, and this notion of unconscious it's like sort of whacking me over the head at the moment, because I think it's one of our biggest obstacles is we just don't realize how we react so unconsciously, so unwittingly to so many things you could just say in life, but certainly even on a day-to-day basis, hour by hour basis, but how that dictates all our outcomes. But the big problem is that we think we're busy and productive, and then every once in a while you'll hear a statement and it will catch you off guard, because I think you process it properly. And what I mean by the example I'm thinking of so much at the moment is the notion that one of the few things all of us have in common with people like Richard Branson and Oprah Winfrey and Brene Brown and Elon Musk and super achievers is that they also have 24 hours in the day. And then when you look at what they do, I mean, it literally is unbelievable. But when we look in the mirror, we have to say, well, they still have to eat and go to the bathroom and get some exercise and sleep and, presumably talk to people that they care about. And they still do, get just a mind-bogglingly, remarkable amount of, incredibly high productive things done. Right. But we're not looking in the mirror enough, I think, and really drilling down. I'm sorry, I know it's a tangent, but at the same time, it's this piece about unconscious. But the same applies not just to what we do, but also, of course, presumably how we think and what our opinions are and how ingrained that is. In fact, it's fascinating. Now I connect more dots to this Stanford economist I interviewed a while back too. Talked about how limiting our upbringing is, because we grow up in little bubbles where we mimic the people around us. We learn their beliefs and opinions. We get exposed only to those ideas and opportunities that we grew up around. And that the only way to really, it ties in exactly to diversity and inclusion, to thrive, the only way to thrive is to make it has to be a proactive effort to get out of the bubble that we live in, where we surround ourselves typically with people that look just like us and have similar beliefs and values and faiths and all the rest of it. So, It's interesting how there's that overlap. So what kind of work, I guess I mentioned it in the bio, but I've never asked you much about it. So it was something, peer advisory work. Is that what you're kind of doing?
Yes. So to your point though, about really, really successful, highly visible people, I think they manage their mindsets better than anybody else.
Yes.
And they have obviously mastered execution. Mm-hmm. But yes, our peer advisory experiences. So the point of putting these first of all, I knew very early on that there's a power to bringing people together in a way that allows them to be safe to grow in a peer advisory experience with each other and to help each other get where they want to go. So I didn't want to just be a trainer or a coach that goes in and says, this is how you do this. Mm-hmm. I wanted them to get the benefit of each other and their own experiences and the power of having a group of people that really want you to be very successful. Mm-hmm. So we put 15 people together that are diverse, women, people of color, LGBTQ, and they're either almost on the cusp of leadership position or just put into a leadership position. And we help them get the skills to be great developers of business, if that's one of their requirements as a successful leader. We help them create really high-performing teams because, as you can imagine, you don't sign up to be a fantastic accountant or lawyer, and the idea that you're going to be a great leader of people really isn't there. Mm-hmm. And we help them get much better at their relationships with people that have real juice in the organization so they can get more support and more advocacy for what they're trying to accomplish as a professional. So what they should come out of with this is a much better kind of position of visibility in the firm, a much better understanding of the well-roundedness and of the value they bring to the table. And when they get put in positions of leadership, they're going to be way more successful fast. Mm-hmm. I saw people that are diverse put into leadership positions too soon or without the adequate enough support to be successful when their white male counterparts were getting the kind of support to be really successful. And I saw them fall flat on their face really soon. And the impact on a culture is just too great to let that happen. So our goal is to not only help people realize their full potential, but have their firms rise up to meet them to help them get that potential.
This is kind of I don't know if this is a side question or not, but I got to thinking if you'd had this type of support when you were at your big four firm, would you have wanted to leave still?
Probably no.
Well, because it got to me thinking, if this is the work you're doing, but because you talk so passionately about, and it was the focus of our conversation in some ways was almost how to leave corporate if you're feeling trapped. Like how not to be so risk averse and to pursue what you're doing within the dreams. And it just crossed my mind that whether this was the work that was, I could certainly see that if you experienced a lot of pain if you've seen some ugly thing, well, you have seen plenty of ugly things in corporate and you want to right those wrongs and help people that just aren't getting the same treatment. Although it's funny, well, it's not funny at all. So, but this non-conscious bias, I only say it's funny because that's a hell of a task to take on because it's, to help people with that takes so much effort for any one of us. And it's funny because I had the same thought when I interviewed this Matthew Jackson, this Stanford economist, because his task really is it's global. It's to get people to embrace people who are not like them. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what an incredible purpose. That's something that will keep him busy for the rest of his life, easily. And in a way, you're talking about something similar, really.
And I've thought a lot about this, and I don't get philosophical very much. So my husband is way more philosophical than I am. But if you back up just a bit and you think about the loss of human potential that happens, we are, I don't know what we are now, 8 billion people on the planet. 50,000 people die a day in the world. People die in wars, or they starve to death, or they get diseases, or they don't get the chance to go to college or get educated well, or they have disabilities that keep them from doing what they really want to do. We have so many things standing in our way from reaching our fullest potential. But in a corporate environment where it only benefits me if every single person in my firm reaches their fullest potential while they're on my turf, that is what I'm there for. And if I'm somehow impeding that from happening, shame on me. And this entire firm is crafted to basically say, not on my watch. We're going to fix this because I want everyone in my firm to have every opportunity to do their absolute best work and be their best professional.
Well, you can't fail with a mindset like that. So what's next? What do you need to keep moving forward with this work?
Well, I've done something a little risky for me in the last couple of months. I have created a couple of strategic partnerships. One of the firms is in media in the diversity space and doesn't have a consulting arm, so I'm becoming their consulting arm. And I've made a couple of key strategic partnerships with certain industries. to drive some of this home. As you can imagine, going back into the big boys is a longer cycle and takes a little bit of connecting the dots. Like one connection leads to that connection to gets you to the buyer in that firm. So it's a longer process, but we are pretty far along now, and we're doing a pretty good job of getting more visibility as to what we're trying to accomplish.
That's fantastic. Good. Yeah. Well, knowing you, I mean, nothing's going to stop you. So that helps. Again, I'm still curious about the traits that you've learned, because, a couple of the things you've said, at least a couple of things, I mean, several comment you made about successful people manage their mindsets better. Talk about some of the things that have helped you become so successful, first in corporate and then running your own business, in terms of how you look at the world. So, for example, when you said, you kind of called me out on it in a way, and you said, well, when I went self-employed, I mean, I'm paraphrasing now, you said I had no intention of making less money. I just was going to build my own empire my own way. And I just recognized it was going to take a while. But that kind of mindset is, well, that's not that's typical. I think because the opposite would be typical. It would be fear-based to say, well, if I leave this very comfortable, high-salaried job, there's no way I'm going to be able to, pull this off anywhere else, and therefore I think I should just stay put. I suspect that's how most people are based. So actually, you kind of had a very abundant approach to it. Talk about, where that came from.
Ooh, it came from being scared to death for the first 2 years that I wouldn't be able to make friends. So, I got some tutelage pretty early on, because in the very beginning, I absolutely had a scarcity mindset. I was scared every real business opportunity that I was going to screw something up, and I really needed it. So I needed to take these jobs, even if I didn't really want to work with certain people because they didn't seem like my kind of people. I took them. I learned some hard lessons from that.
Yeah.
And I learned that if you show up to an interaction, actually, I made a resolution to myself a few years ago on New Year's, that instead of saying, I want to make so much revenue this year, I'm going to make a resolution that every single person I'm sitting in front of, so if I have a meeting or an event or whatever it is, I'm going to make a sizable positive impact on the person on the other side of that table. And that changed everything about how I was showing up as a firm owner and how people received what I was trying to say. The other thing is getting really, really precise about what you want and only trying to attract that thing. So let me give you an example of what that means. So I work primarily in service firms, mostly professional service firms. I knew that was going to be my lane, because I know it's a lot more challenging to get 10,000 people that are also the product in the same, running in the same direction, than it is to have a product that you can somewhat separate from the people that are doing it. But that's only a really small part of what I really, really wanted. What I really wanted was motivated people that had the ability to self-reflect and wanted to do bigger things than they were doing now. And that was actually way more important than how many employees they had or how much revenue they had or what lane they were in business. And once I understood that more fully, I am working with some of the best people I've ever met, doing great things with them because they think like I do. And to try to convince someone that isn't that motivated and has no ability to self-reflect, that they should go through this, pretty intense process of transformation strategically was just too much work, and frankly was wasting ability.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, I don't know how many people who are listening, of how many other podcasts of mine that you've listened to, other people, but it is fascinating how when I talk to certainly top sales producers, almost exclusively, that's one of their success secrets, is that they've been that picky, that they have said no more. And just the other day, I heard a Warren Buffett quotation that the difference between successful and really successful people is that really successful people say no to almost everything, which I thought was fascinating. But I want to ask you, where you said either one of the changes you made was when you would sit down with people, instead of focusing on financial outcomes, you would focus on making a positive impact for the other person. Can you share an example or two about what you're talking about there?
Sure. So I do a lot of networking, especially in the Chicagoland area. most people, even if they are charged with developing new revenue, have absolutely no idea how to network properly. The best thing you can do for someone you're networking with is either send them business or send them to somebody who can get them more business.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And that doesn't happen that much. So sitting down and, we don't do a very good job in being explicit on what we need, what we're looking for, and how the person can help us.
Mm-hmm.
People want to help you. They just don't really know how most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're running 100 miles an hour most of the time.
Right.
You have to get explicit on what you need and what you want and how they can plug into that. And the more you can do that for them, help them define for themselves what they really want and how your network marries up with what they want most, you're going to be a superstar to people. Because most people have never experienced that kind of networking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would do. I would sit down. I'd ask them about their firm. I'd ask them about what they're most challenged by. I'd ask them, what they most wanted, how they plugged into the best opportunities, what kinds of people were best for them to be connected to, what kinds of clients, why those kinds of clients. And then I would send them connections to exactly those kinds of people. And it makes a difference because people don't usually experience that.
So so to connect the dots, so beyond that, so you helped people, you realized that it was more effective to have meetings where the focus would be on you helping the other person. And then how has that helped you?
It helped me because I became known as someone that was a great connector.
Mm-hmm.
And then my clients would start singing the story about what I actually do a lot. I'm not very good at self-promotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I'm trying to work on. But having someone else sing your praises for whatever it is, being a great connector, being a great, strategist, whatever it is to me way more powerful than me saying that to people. So I would rather they experience what it is to work with me as a person first before we get into even what I could do for them professionally.
So, the only thing that's going through my head as a concern is I've met and talked to plenty of people who did lots of, the networking type meetings. I want to give it a slightly different name because obviously they haven't been but they haven't been very effective for them. In other words, I think I'm trying to differentiate between what it is that many people do wrong with the meetings. I mean, you're saying they don't focus enough on helping the other person, or maybe if you've got two people who are vague about what they want, then very little will come from those meetings. But it's this reputation. Go ahead.
Uncomfortable. I think people are uncomfortable asking for what they really want,
mm-hmm.
or even knowing how to ask for what they really want. So they talk about personal stuff. There's lots of small talk. There's where you went to school. And I know some of that is bonding, so I don't want to completely discount it.
Yep.
But like I said, when you get down to real commerce and you can we all do so much of this, then we should be all really wildly helpful to each other. So at this point in the game, it really should be, how can I connect you to the people you want to know most? Why are they the people you want to know most? And what challenges are you having that I can help with the network I have? Some of it is, I need a new website done, and I have 3 people you can vet for that.
Right. And you gravitated away from, it sounds like in your early days, you were kind of giving free advice, consulting advice. Is that possibly also partly because perhaps your network wasn't as strong and you were looking to bring value, so you did it that way, and then you realized that didn't help you generate business?
No, giving free advice doesn't help you get a lot of business. Because you've already established your value, which is I'll do it for free.
That's really interesting. Because there's a flip side that I've heard to that when you share good ideas to people, it plants the seeds that people make this assumption, okay, well, this person must have a lot more good ideas, and how can I get exposed to them? And you're saying,
I think there's a fine line.
Yes. And I suppose it's probably what you project as well. If you project somehow that you don't value yourself as much, that maybe people will take advantage of that and will take it. Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm conscious that we need to wrap up here shortly, Trisha. What haven't I asked you that you wanted to make sure we sort of addressed? I don't normally ask that question, but I just sort of am wondering if I feel like there's some kind of use the word juice to talk about people at the top, but just some driving forces that, or things that have helped you become the driven person that you are that I haven't asked you about?
I think one of the things that I have not tapped into as much early in my career that I'm doing much more of now is associating with myself. I haven't asked for help. I've always tried to figure it out myself.
Mm-hmm.
And most really successful people have a lot of, influencers, mentors, whatever you want to call them, that help them propel themselves where they want to go next. And that, I think, is extremely powerful, and it's something I'm only now learning. So being around people that are very motivated and driven, having and have high expectations of themselves is, you've said this before in your prior podcasts, and even from all of my conversations with you, you surround yourself with great, driven, heavy thinking people, then that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And if you surround yourself with unmotivated, naysayers, then at some point that's gonna get on you. So you gotta get out of that.
Yeah, no question. I mean, almost everybody, one way or another, brings that up when I talk to them, and my feeling is most people, it's almost like another unconscious thing. We are unconscious about the people that we're closest to, and we don't perhaps really think deeply or even more deeply a little bit about the impact they have on us that's positive and negative, because otherwise we do absolutely stay put to where we are. So I'm glad you brought that up. And again, it's funny that too, the asking for help thing comes up, or the topic comes up often. Although, again, I feel like I'm about to say something silly and stereotypical. I feel like I hear it more from women. In other words, it's harder for women to ask for help than men, but it's a powerful lesson. I mean, in other words, the people I've interviewed who said it was a really powerful lesson for them, I feel like most of them were female, which I find kind of interesting. Although ironically, I think, as you alluded to with the networking, I think it's equally true for men that they struggle with it, because it feels like it can feel needy, or we see it's labeled exactly. So yeah, fascinating stuff. I think that also ties into the value piece and the worthiness piece as well, that they're asking. But anyway, we could go on and on. So wrapping up, one of my favorite questions to wrap up is, since you left that small town in Ohio, who have you become?
Ooh, I have become a woman who sees my potential much more vividly, with a path to get there. I was kind of a dreamer before, with no idea of the path. And now I know the path is laid out, and I just have to keep walking it.
That's fantastic. I've got to ask, anything that you've learned that's helped you get that clarity, or maybe I should say, what has helped you most get that clarity?
I've done a lot of inner work, I think, in the last 3 years. And it does come down to worthiness, and it does come down to believing I'm absolutely capable of getting so much further that I would have ever thought about when I thought if I could get a great corporate job and not be in my little small town in Ohio, that would be fantastic. And I can go anywhere in the world and do this stuff. I can have an enormous impact on what we're doing for people all over the world. And it's really just a matter of time until we get there. And it requires me to constantly, I've never been competitive. That's the strange thing. I've never looked to the sides and said, what is this guy doing? I've only just kept going straight ahead. And it requires you to constantly evolve into what you need to do to be that person at the top.
Yeah, no, and it's another fascinating thing too, is that the people that are doing well or have accomplished great things also have that mindset too, that they almost feel like they're just scratching the surface. They start to realize just how much more capable they are. And I find that amazingly inspiring, because I would also say that the people who say that are at least 40 plus years old, in other words, 40s and 50s. I don't know if anyone said it in their 60s, but I probably just haven't interviewed that many people in their 60s. But I just find it inspiring to hear that, because it's not get that cultural model we live in where, so many accolades are placed on professional athletes and even film stars who typically are young and good looking. But the whole notion of, what we're talking about is about a fulfilled life, not, retiring from your injuries at 31 and then going on a speaker circuit to talk about that great touchdown. I'm being facetious here, but, there is quite a bit of that. And not to discount either that those, to get to that level is impressive. But it's also inspiring to hear about people that are different ages and going on to great things as well. So Trisha, how can listeners learn more about you? And actually, I don't normally say this, but also, what do you want to throw out to the audience in terms of, in the spirit of asking?
Ooh, so you can find us at empoweredlc.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn as well, Trisha Daho, Daho. We are doing a lot of diversity and inclusion events right now. We are doing a retreat to Paris for women in business.
Oh, nice.
In October.
That's awesome.
We are going to have an epic adventure. And this is my first time partnering with a life coach to actually bring both sides of your life to one place and decide how you're going to make it even better. In the most beautiful city in the world. That's become like a second home to me. And that's going to be that's our first annual. So we're going to scope out other countries to do this as well.
Wow, that's spectacular. And who's eligible for this trip?
If you are a woman who either owns her own business or has a book of business requirement in a bigger firm, this is exactly the place for you. Okay.
Brilliant. Great to know. That sounds really exciting. And then otherwise, I guess, just a massive thank you, Trisha, for joining us on this. It's been a great, I think this is value. I think what's fascinating about this topic is it's a great topic for people who are sort of perhaps stuck professionally and certainly in a very large company. And there's plenty here to take away, I think, from anyone also who's self-employed and running a business as well, because there's the mindset piece and the networking piece as well that goes into this, plus all the things that we're not conscious of in terms of how we're getting in our own way. So again, thanks for sharing all this wisdom, and I encourage anyone to keep tabs on the work that Trisha's doing. Were there any other asks that you had? Or was it?
No, I just want to thank you because you are one of the most thoughtful and insightful people I've ever met. Thanks. And you're doing amazing things. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Trisha. That's very kind. And again, listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed already to the podcast, please do so. Leave a comment. Don't also check out my masterminds. I've started, it's been a while now, but I'm running those there. It's funny when Trisha, you talked about the type of people that are a good fit. I don't know if I can find my notes quickly enough, but really motivated people that are willing to self-reflect. That kind of sums it up in many ways. It's a great fit for that type of person. So check that tab out on my website. Otherwise, thanks everybody. And I'd like to wrap up with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.